However, you're not looking at years down the road. You're not looking at your car being towed and this sort of thing unless absolutely necessary. In other words, you're going back to the way it was in the 50s, to coin a phrase and to give an outlook. Okay, the other part of this is morality. Nobody can legislate morality. But there's a cute little saying and phrase that covers it pretty much, and it's called the Golden Rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So between the two of those, real freedom and understanding you're responsible for what you do. You can't just go off and do everything you felt like you always wanted to do because some of it might harm somebody. Then people understand the responsibility that goes along with the freedom being given. So that's pretty much the combination that you're looking at this point.
Okay. I want to back up a little bit on this because you said that pretty much, I guess, arrests or suspension of offices would not occur much below the governor level, and I understand that given Freedom Reigns County projects and what you've talked about on prior shows. What about state legislatures? What happens to elected officials now seated in state legislatures?
Well, if they're crooks, they need to be taken out and introduced to the FEMA camps they built for us.
Would they, for instance, have the ability to override the decisions, or let's say the decision's probably a bad word, to override the documents that have been filed? In other words, is it possible that they're going to assert legislative authority or even potentially judicial authority through the courts in order to attempt to override this?
Well, the interesting part about that is no, they cannot. You have to remember this is not the notification process is purely a notification process. However, the statements that are included with that also stipulate that we revert in governance back to those days. If you go back to 1800 as an example, you might want to note that most of the things that we deal with now didn't exist. Okay, the premise is that if they were not extant at that point, they have no impact today. Now you have to remember, the military does support this effort. I refer to a thing called the plan, and these things and items and actions are included therein. They do not want anybody to get the crazy idea that there's going to be martial law or that this is a military coup. So the only way to do that is for the people to declare their freedom, thus giving them the civilian authority to act by the will of the people towards freedom. The adjudications in terms of what actually happens to the individuals, you've got the military, federal marshals, local law enforcement. Local law enforcement is going to be backed up by a combination of the federal marshals and the military as needs. In other words, if you got 1,000 people, the local sheriff with five deputies is going to have a problem getting all the cuffs on. So you have people to stand in and help. Pretty simple. The authority, though, comes from the people. The authorization and civil authority comes from the people, and with the military's assistance, puts this thing in a different perspective than what has happened before. I mean, in the beginning, at the first of this Declaration of Independence, we didn't have an army. I mean, you got a bunch of farmers with shotguns at best. That was an extraordinary problem, as I understand it. You got a lot of snipers, this sort of thing. But you did not have people who were organized and in a position to actually accommodate what needed to be done. In this case, the ideology, of the plan is, first of all, an orderly function, a lawful function, and a peaceable one. In other words, they don't want a bunch of nuts with guns running around shooting at people. That's not what this is about. This is simply a direct, lawful replacement of, quote, and I'm quoting, the crooks. Now, this is the reason for the importance and critical actions known as the localization. The people have to look at their local government. If that's a county, fine. If it's sparsely populated, that may be even better. It might be easier to spot somebody that's crooked. But this goes down to the mayor of small towns, city councils, things of that nature. All of these have to be done by the people. The only portion of this that is to be addressed by the action itself is primarily the federal government and its assistants. In other words, the governors, possibly, and up. So a legislature that is of a state is going to have to be in a position to be looked at very closely in order to determine if somebody has taken a bribe. I mean, did the guy go in there at base pay and all of a sudden he's a multimillionaire? If so, then there's some crooked dealings going on, and that can be legalized crooked dealings. The idea recently came up of the instant trades and things of this nature. They say they're not guilty, and therefore it's law. Well, just because somebody says so does not necessarily mean that that's the truth. So these are the things that there's a lot that goes into this. Go ahead.
Okay. Chain of command. We're talking about a military that I assume is activated under these documents being the will of the people. The first actions will be what? Will they be military in nature, or will we see a mobilization of military, or is this going to be background in terms of public perception?
They're trying to keep this background. You're liable to see some troops show up at different places, but only as support. It is not a military action. I don't know if you're familiar with Posse Comitatus.
Yes.
The field manuals and the United States Code of Military Justice stipulates that the military is not to engage civilians in this country, period. Now, there are some exceptions to that where somebody might push somebody around a little bit with a baton. They might be in riot gear, that sort of thing. Other than that, no. If someone offers an armed offensive, then shame on them. This is why I've been trying to express don't engage the military. That the military, the majority of the police forces, are on our side this time. That's a big, and I mean a huge difference between what has transpired elsewhere and before. So what you got to remember is, first of all, I did an addressment of the troops. That thing went like wildfire through the troops. Now I'm talking about your average enlisted person. It went to then it started up the chain of command on my recommendation in that same show. What you want to do is you want to ask your commander, do you intend to follow what we got here? And right now, 99% are saying yes. So you're looking at something that is agreeable to the Joint Chiefs, the Pentagon, etc. Now, what is not openly easily stated is that there will be some civilian appointments. This has to be. And these are temporary and limited in power. This is something that everybody has trouble getting their head around. You're going to need a commander-in-chief for the simple fact that commander-in-chief has to deal with illegal and unlawful and unconstitutional executive orders, treaties, agreements, etc. And there is a load of them, believe me. So then, you have the other adjudications and decisions. Now, 99% of everything is going to be left up to we the people in terms of it's going to be 24/7 voting. It's going to have to be that way. We have a lot of decisions to make. There are also a couple of large groups of constitutionalists, and by this I mean experts in the Constitution, active constitutional judges, lawyers, and experts, etc., who are looking at how to structure things from that 1787 Constitution in such a manner that this problem we're dealing with today can never happen again. So what you're looking at is most of the federal government going by the wayside. You're looking at an extreme and extraordinary difference in state government. A lot of this stuff is unnecessary. You got EPA, you got this, you got that. Why does somebody need a drug enforcement officer? Well, I understand what's going on. Very simply, the people that are doing these things obviously have not been attended to. That needs to change. What's the morality? Well, what's the legality? And you go from there. I mean, it is a very complicated thing that's being dealt with. So
okay, let me ask you this. Given what I've been told by whistleblowers and insiders, we know that what we call the military-industrial complex has been very interwoven with each other. Corporate interests have bled into the military for decades now, certainly since post-World War II period. I would think at this point the military would need, if the Joint Chiefs, if the Pentagon are on line with this, there would also have to be a purging within the Pentagon and within the ranks to ferret out the people whose interests lie in this military-industrial complex. We're talking tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars that feed this monster in Washington, D.C. I live near Washington, D.C., and I can tell you that the bedroom communities of Washington, D.C. are feathered by federal dollars that feed this directly.
That's true. Now, what you have to understand is that the fun and games started back around the Korean War. And that fun and games was fostered primarily by corporate interests. And I'll explain that very simply. The more munitions and personnel required by either side of a conflict, when you back both sides, the more you make. Right. So, in that light, what happened back then started this, basically. And that was that the United Nations was telling the communists exactly our troop strength, our locations, how many tanks, how many personnel, where we were going, troop movements, etc. Now, I would like to know why the UN, being a treasonous entity, is still on our soil. That would be my first question. Well, excuse me, some of these insiders, people that I've found that do know what's going on, have stated they would love to put a bunch of bulldozers down there and shove it off in the water to see if it floats, including anybody that might be inside. That's how they feel about it. Now, whether they'll do that or not, that's questionable. But there is a strict divorcement in two ways. First of all, they do not like the idea of some corporate or politician telling them what to do. They do not like the idea of foreign entities being in charge when it should be us in charge. They do not like the idea that they have to beg for monies. These things are all in process to be addressed, and that's part of the structure of what is happening.
Okay, so assuming that the military itself is lined up with all of this, it goes back to what I had asked you earlier. In terms of chain of command, the initiation of the operation itself and the authority to initiate it, which is obviously, as you've stated, Drake, coming from the paperwork that has been filed. But within the chain of command, there has to be a top-down situation. That's how armies and military operations run. Where does the initiation of authority begin in an operation where the commander-in-chief, being ostensibly that person who occupies the White House, would be in charge?
My understanding of the agreement that was partially laid out to me is that this will be, first of all, everything will be made public, so everybody knows. Number two, the agreement is that the commander-in-chief, who probably will be appointed, and this will be temporary for a specific period with limited power, If the man gets the job done before then he's free to go. He's done with the office.